All right, welcome back to the Talk to Me PDD podcast. I'm your host, PDD. This is my opportunity to talk to you about productivity, people management, and leadership. Today, episode number 15, Lead with Authority. So, we're going to talk a little bit about different types of authority to use in people management and leadership. This is a topic that I cover in my book, People Management from the Ground Up. So, if you are interested in learning more about this, please check out my book available on Amazon. So, thinking about how we lead different types of authority and how that can help motivate or demotivate people. I think of it in two main types where you have direct authority and indirect authority. So, if you're a people manager with a formal reporting hierarchy, you have the opportunity to lead with direct authority, meaning you can more or less issue orders and tell people what to do and that sort of thing. Whereas if you're not a people manager with direct reports, you're an individual contributor, you don't usually have that option as formally. So you have to do indirect authority. You have to lead through influence and convince people to do what you want them to do. Oftentimes, when I'm talking to individual contributors that are aspiring to a people manager role, this appears to be a blocker to them. How are they supposed to get some of these things done without the direct authority that a people manager has, or there may be some frustration because it's really hard to lead through indirect authority a lot of times, where it's this idea that, hey, if I was just a people manager with direct authority, I could get a lot more done. I could just kind of tell people to do what they needed to do, and it would be a lot more effective. What I think people don't realize is, as a people manager, even with direct authority, that's not always the most effective way to lead. I would say it's maybe 5 to 10% at most of the way that I think about my leadership is with direct authority, and the vast majority of it is leading through indirect authority. So if you're an individual contributor aspiring to be a people manager, you should take this as a good thing, because a lot of the practice and skills you develop leading with indirect authority is going to transfer over to the work that you do as a people manager. So even though it's hard and it's challenging, it's not something that's necessarily going to change all that much when you move into a people manager role. Um, so getting kind of into it a little bit more, why is indirect authority or leading through indirect authority more effective a lot of the times is that most people want to have autonomy and ownership and independence in how they go and execute their work. Whereas if somebody is just giving you orders, telling you what to do, it doesn't feel that way. So being able to have ownership or sort of your own independent thoughts about how you're going to go execute something aligns much better with being led through indirect authority, sort of bringing you along and convincing you why it's important to do something, as opposed to just telling you to go and do something. It could be the exact same thing, but it's going to feel much different if you're on board and you feel like you're setting some of your own direction about how you're going to go and execute a plan or a way that you're being led. Um, if you're somebody who's fiercely independent, especially maybe if you're more senior or more skilled, it may actually breed some resentment if you're just being told what to do and you don't feel like you have any input and ownership over it. So even if you have direct authority in a leadership position, it can sometimes be counterproductive depending on you're working with, if they feel like they're being excluded from the decision making process and they don't have ownership of the work that's actually happening. Um, so now we'll get into just some of the tactics that I've found helpful working with indirect authority and leading through indirect leadership, or indirect authority anyway. Um, Being really clear in the communications and what you're trying to accomplish, um, it can be really hard to get people to do what you want them to do anyway when you've clearly communicated the goals. But if you haven't done that, it's going to be almost impossible. Um, so again, the communication is something I'll talk about separately. It's something I've written about in my book as well. But that may mean you need to follow up. You may need to tell people multiple times sort of what you're trying to accomplish, how it relates to them, following up with them, making sure it's clear, so that when you do sort of let them go and work on it independently, um, that what they come back with is actually what you're looking for. And you need to have clear alignment on that first. And that comes down to communicating what the goals are. Um, and then next, how does what you're trying to lead them to, or what you're trying to get accomplished, how does that help the person that you're asking to do it? So is this a something that's going to contribute to their development goal? Maybe if it's a direct report of yours. If you're working across team boundaries, is this work that is going to help the other team as well? So I think this is one of the pitfalls that I see sometimes, is that leaders may try to accomplish something that's beneficial for them, that where they need help from another group or another party, and they're not presenting it necessarily in a way that is, clearly mutually beneficial to both parties. It's sort of like, hey, I need this, I need you to do it. And that may work sometimes, but I think when it's a win-win situation, it's going to help others buy in more when you can't tell them directly to go and do that, or even if you can. Um, Sometimes you need to be persistent and follow up, maybe more so when you're leading through indirect authority as opposed to direct authority. So kind of going back to the communications piece, you may need to follow up multiple times when you're trying to influence and get someone else to do something where you're trying to lead them there. Just because you've said it once, and even if you've said it clearly, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. Um, and what I found is effective is trying to be polite and not get frustrated if things aren't happening, but being persistent and following up and just keeping track of it and letting the person know that it's still important to you. It may not be that they don't want to do it, but like many of us, they're balancing a lot of different tasks, and maybe they just haven't gotten to it. And if you don't follow up, they say, okay, well, maybe this isn't that important. I can just let it go. So sometimes you just need to remind people when you're trying to lead them along or trying to get them to contribute to a goal that you have, when you can't tell them formally to do it, making sure that you follow up and you let them know that it's still important to you to get accomplished. Um, Sometimes having a little bit of star power can help with influence, and this could be, um, sometimes people look at job titles and are influenced by that. Maybe you see somebody higher up in the reporting hierarchy and they're asking you to do something, you may be more likely to contribute because you could see it, see yourself getting some credit from them, or maybe there's somebody who's a subject matter expert in an area that you want to get involved in. So that's sometimes that you can use something that is possible to use to influence others, if you have that credibility or in certain areas. Now, I don't think you want to be like Ron Burgundy and be like, hey, I'm kind of a big deal, maybe you should do this. But if it's something where, maybe in your signature you can highlight it, kind of what your role is, or maybe some other things that you're working on that might align to the person or group that you're trying to bring along, that can be helpful as well. Just another sort of subtle way to influence others indirectly to bring them along, to get them to do what you're trying to get them to do. And then a lot of it comes down to relationships, and that's why networking is so important. So establishing yourself as somebody who is trustworthy, and that only happens over time, and demonstrating that you'll follow through with your own commitments and that you're going to do the things that you say that you do. So that's why it's always important to be cultivating and maintaining a professional network, even within the working groups that you have. As you're going to look to get those groups to support the work that you want them to do, you're asking them to do something for you that they don't have to do. Um, One of the things that you can do is proactively try and help and support other people when they have asks and when they need things that they need to get done. And that's going to build a rapport, and they're going to want to pay you back when you come and ask for help, and will contribute to, following you along on different paths if you've given it back to them. And it just breeds this reciprocal relationship where you can help and support each other and accomplish more together. Um, Sometimes, I mean, ideally, you've sort of built up these relationships and you can look kind of at past experience that they're going to be able to trust you, and you sort of know what to expect from each other. But sometimes you're going to have to reach out for help and try and lead other groups or people that you don't have that history with. Um, and thinking about how you can build initial rapport and trying to establish yourself as somebody who's trustworthy and approachable and easy to work with. So obviously a little bit of art to that, but something to think about if you're reaching out to somebody you don't have an established networking relationship with and you're asking them to do something for you. What's that first impression like? Are you coming across in a way that they're going to want to work with you, that they see the benefits of it? So again, a little bit of an art there, but I think that's helpful to think about as you're asking for help from other people. Part of that is listening to them as well. It's not just about what you want. I mean, you're going to start there and sort of present how you see the benefits to everyone, but they're going to have their own perspective as well. So making sure that you're actively listening to that, hearing what their concerns might be or what their thoughts are, and you're not just set on your own path. That's going to make it much more likely that they're willing to do what you want if you're hearing what they have to say and incorporating that feedback into whatever you're doing. One of the things I talk a little bit about in my book that I'll try and give a little context to, but in some cases maybe you have to do a little, what I'll say, quote unquote, shaming. So sometimes you're trying to get someone in another group to move along, to do something they're supposed to do to support your team, and it doesn't happen, and you're persistent and you're polite, and it's not changing. So then you can start doing things like, pulling in maybe the person's manager if you have a communication thread, and obviously these aren't things that the person's necessarily going to be super happy about. So I would say try to do other things first, but at a certain point, you may need them to do something, and if they're not doing it and you've done all these other things, you may need to start sort of escalating into the exposure to them not doing the work that they're supposed to do. So again, try and build this up gradually, see if that can get things moving along by bringing in other people who are potentially seeing, their own direct report not doing what they're supposed to do. So if you're going to do this, obviously be careful. Make sure that you've done your due diligence, that you feel confident that you're in the right, that this person really should be doing this. You've given them ample opportunity before you start sort of exposing them as not doing their job. And again, maybe you make a mistake here. Maybe there was something, there's some valid reason, or maybe you missed something. So if you do kind of expose somebody and bring in their management and say, hey, this person's not doing this, can you help move this along? And you end up being in the wrong, then just apologize and sort of set the record straight and say, here's what I thought the situation was. Now I understand better. So, but I do think it's an effective technique. Sometimes, especially when you're working at scale and things can maybe get lost. If you've tried all the other things and it's not working, you may have to resort to this. On the more positive side of that, if you're in a people manager role or maybe a subject matter expert role, and you're collaborating and leading across different organizations, giving praise to those that help you is a really great way to build those relationships and professional network. Getting praise from another people manager outside of your own org, or a subject matter expert who's maybe a senior individual contributor in another org, can really carry a lot of weight and make people feel really good about their work, demonstrate to their own management that they're doing an excellent job. So think about that if you're in one of those positions, either as a people manager or a senior individual contributor. When you do get help or you do see great work and support from other organizations, make sure you're highlighting that, calling that out to that person and to their manager, and that's going to help build that relationship where they're going to want to help you more in the future if there's another opportunity. Now, all that being said about indirect authority, there definitely is time to use direct authority, especially as a people manager. So I thought I'd talk about a couple areas there. If you're giving critical feedback or specific opportunities to one of your directs or to even a colleague, that's a hard conversation to have. Sometimes if you try and be too indirect about it, the message can be lost, or you can kind of weasel your way out of really saying what needs to be said. So I think that's a good area to focus on direct feedback and leading with direct authority. If you need to set boundaries, whether that's for an individual or even for your own team and how people are working, that's something where I think it's good to be direct and lead with direct authority. Sometimes within a team conversation or a group conversation, it may go from sort of a lively or maybe a tough conversation or argument and devolve a little bit. And I think that's a time where it's appropriate to be more of a referee and put some guardrails on the conversation and maybe step in there and try and break things up and use your authority as the people manager or formal organizational leader to do so. So again, it's a gray area because I think it's good in general to let teams work things out for themselves, but there are certainly times where it may go too far or a conversation may be unproductive or take away from things, and then I think that's the right time to step in with direct authority. And then lastly, I mean, this is maybe more of an individual one, but for my own leadership style, I like to be very direct about the objectives that I want to lead the organization towards and define those and certainly take feedback. But that's something that I like to have a clear idea on and then pass that down to my team. But then when it gets into the execution towards those objectives, that's something that I like to be more indirect. I like to have my team, take ownership of actually how they implement those and be more egalitarian in that approach. So it's a mix of the two where I like to be very direct in setting the objectives and then more indirect on sort of how specifically they get executed and give the team ownership on that. That's just my personal style. And thinking about finding your own and what's the right blend of direct authority and indirect authority for your own leadership style and for whatever team that you manage. One of the things that Jocko Willink talks about in a lot of his leadership developments is how you build distributed leadership within your organization. And I think being highly skilled and utilizing indirect authority helps develop distributed leadership within your organization much more so than being a leader who's primarily focused on leading with direct authority, because you're constantly giving your team the opportunity to make decisions and to figure out how to lead and to understand the why behind what the organization is doing. So when you're not there, when they have to lead on their own in that distributed environment, they're going to be able to make better decisions that are better connected to the outcomes that you're driving. Then the last thing I would say is just, if you're an individual contributor thinking about becoming a people manager or just sort of frustrated with not having direct authority, just kind of get used to it and embrace the challenge. It's not something that's going to go away if you get into a formal people management role. So just continue to develop your skills there, and that's something that'll translate when you do become a people manager. And I think it's something that's useful to talk about when you're interviewing for a people manager role, right? You can talk about how you develop these skills of influence and leadership to get things done, which is something that you're going to do as a people manager. So there you go. That's my bit around different types of authority in leadership and how I look at it. Again, you want more around people management and my thoughts there, people management from the ground up, check it out on Amazon. And I will see you next time on Talk to Me, PDD.